Honey, I blew up the business.
Welcome to the podcast. And I'm very excited to say that we've got a fantastic guest lined up for you. It's a good friend of mine and business partner, Geoff Heath. We've worked together for 5 or 6 years at my business, the tech department. And you'll be pleased to know he has a very long and illustrious career before meeting me and coming to be part of the team at the tech department. And today I'm going to quiz him about that time and winkle out some of his hints and tips about a life working in the music industry, in the games industry, and in business in general. He's got a great CV. So welcome to the podcast, Geoff.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
And I've got to start by asking you, how the hell did you end up working with the Beatles?
Okay, well, first of all, just a bit of background. I've been 25 odd years in music publishing and then 30 odd years in the computer games. And in my late 20s, a company called ATV, large TV corporation, probably the largest independent one in the UK, hired me to build up their music publishing business, which is an incredible risk on their side. But anyway, I took the job, which was lovely. And with a little bit of funding, we started to build a pretty decent business. And I refused to sit in their main office building, and I had a building around the corner, which I worked from. And I got a phone call from the finance director, which is now CFO. And he said, "Can you come and see me?" And I thought, oh dear, they're going to fire me. So I get into his office, and there's this guy who was a very canny guy from, I think, Nottingham or somewhere like that. And he said to me, "Geoff," I said, "Yeah." He said, "How do you fancy the Beatles publishing?" And I said, "Well, I hope you've got deep pockets." And he said, "Well, interestingly, Paul McCartney at the time was dating one Lisa Rinman, whose brother and father were lawyers in New York. So it was an easy conversation to actually get a communication going. As far as John Lennon was concerned, he was hiding in New York because he hadn't got a green card. And so I started to bombard him with postcards, and I think were telexes at the time, to any place that I thought he might be, in a studio or in an office, with no luck. And then one day a postcard appeared that I'd sent him, and I'd sent him a postcard of the Queen saying, "We're both missing you." And he'd drawn himself lifting up the Queen's skirt and saying, "Geoff, I am here. And yes, come to New York and let's see how we get on." So I went to New York, went to the Dakota building. Yoko opened the door, come in, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what's this going to be like? Unfortunately, we got on very well. And so part of my travels were to go to New York fairly regularly and see John. And I do remember him playing me songs which I thought were wonderful, which to this day, a long time ago, I've never seen the light of day. So that's how I ended up working with Lennon and McCartney.
So what year was this?
It was about 25 years ago, I guess, something like that. Yeah.
And so you're in this job in the music industry, and you get this opportunity to start, well, to work with these two legends of music. So how old were you at the time?
I think I was still in my late 20s, believe it or not. And it really was a dream job for me, because going to the States, apart from love going on in first class, because that's what they did for you, and staying at the Beverly Wiltshire in the what was called the Vassarelli suite, which was John's favourite suite, on 2 floors. Not quite sure why I needed a 2-floor suite. But what I think I did do was obviously get them both stimulated again to write songs. And with John, certainly, you know, I think the pinnacle of what we did together was the Imagine album. And with Paul, I mean, he had been, when I first met him, really holed up in his place in St John's Wood, not really doing much. And I think Linda at the time was getting him to get going and get writing and form a band. And I was kind of around to help them do that. And I think one of the things that we did do, which they loved, was that we did a book of all their songs with music, and we called it The Beatles Complete, and it became a really, in its day, bestseller. And I think it kind of affirmed to them that I was really more interested in their songwriting and everything else than the money it could generate, because everyone knew it could generate a lot of money, and just loved it.
So it's a fairly sticky situation, though. I mean, looking at it, you were the bad guy potentially, and you're this young guy thrown into this situation. So how did you feel though going into that meeting with, when you walked into the apartment and Yoko Ono opened the door? How were you feeling at that moment?
Terrified, to be honest with you, because I thought if I screw this up, he'll never talk to me again. But I guess the good news is I think they realised I was still a young guy. I wore jeans and a T-shirt, and I certainly wasn't, quotes, the suits that they thought they'd sold their company to. And also, enjoy working with songwriters, enjoy working with creative people generally.
So what did you learn from that experience in terms of working with creative people?
You never know what you're going to get next. And I know a famous songwriter once said to me, Geoff, I'm having a terrible time writing a new hit or new composition. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, I'm sitting here at my keyboard and I'm looking at a blank piece of paper and I can't see anything else. And I think the thing that I did understand is that when you're creating something, I call it the blank piece of paper problem. And I think, funny enough, the same thing applies with writing computer games. Some days it works, some days it doesn't. And I think all you've got to do is be supportive and be around if they are one day stuck and want to talk to somebody.
Interesting, because obviously the world I'm in and the world a lot of us are in now is creative, or any kind of innovation within a company is creative. So having gone through that experience, and how do you what advice would you have for people who were working with creative teams and wanted to get the most out of them, or to help inspire them as you were able to do at that time?
I think when you're working with creative people, the most important thing is listen and be supportive. And I think really that you just got to find a way to get them working better. And that's a familiar cry that we all know about, working better.
What does working better mean to you?
I think it means always not necessarily accepting the first thing that you've done and striving to do better and better. And I know that sounds obvious, but if we're creating games or creating songs, it's the same thing. It's easy to just trot something out and go, well, I've done that. But then I think you've got to challenge yourself and say, really, really, can I do better than that? And if you can, do it.
So do you find yourself, it's almost giving confidence or giving people a kind of chivying people along? Is that a part of that?
I think sometimes you have to be, a little bit pushy and say, look, what exactly is your problem? I mean, have you had a fallout with your partner as the cat died? I mean, being slightly sarcastic there, but certainly find out what's got people down about the day and figure it out from there. And as I think I've always said to people that I work with, if you're feeling down about something and it's Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, ring me up. I'll talk to you. My wife, who's been married to me for years and years and years, knows that if I get a phone call at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, it's somebody important who's got a problem. And if people ring up at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning and say, oh, great result from Chelsea last night, I tend to put the phone down.
So when I phone you on Sunday at 10 o'clock, what do I have to say for you to keep the call?
Geoff, I've got a real problem here. Let me tell you about it.
Okay, so you've got this sort of a role of there's a sort of psychological part of your job. Almost, you're kind of there as a counsellor and helping hand and confidant. Yeah,
I think it's a combination of that and being a strict parent at times. Get a life. What's wrong with you?
Really?
Yeah.
So have you got any stories in in the music industry about where that's worked?
Off the top of my head, I must be. There's too many to actually think of one that would be of interest. But I think the most important thing is to really, put your metaphorical arm around people and just say, that is just great what you've just done. Really good. What a great idea. And mean it.
So you had this amazing career in the music industry. Well, how did you get into the games industry?
A lawyer friend of mine who operated out of the West Coast rang me up one day because this guy found us a lot of clients to represent in Europe. And he said, it's a video game company. And I said, a video game company? He said, yeah, you've got these big cartridge things and you put them in a box and you plug it into your television and you play games. And I said, have you been smoking a lot recently? And he said, no, I'm deadly serious. He said, I'm going to send you some stuff and I'll get a box delivered to you. And it was my kind of what I call water rally moment. I suddenly realized that there was something here and I got quite excited about it to the point where I decided to take that leap from publishing to computer and video games, which was a bit scary at the time.
So it was scary, but how much downside was there for you to go from, you were obviously you're successful in a very proven industry, and you're going to this new thing. So how did you, what was that process? How did you go about that?
I think in my typical way, I thought this sounds like a real challenge. And I've been a music publisher for quite a long time, since a very early age. And I know it sounds weird, but you work with some of the songwriters that I work with, and I've worked with a lot of great songwriters apart from Lennon and McCartney. You get to the kind of, well, actually, I'm now in my kind of 50s. What am I going to do now? Where do I go from here? And along comes this exciting new business, and I just thought, right, let's go for it.
And so what was the first move you made into the video games industry?
Yeah, no, I think what it was that I kind of kept one foot in music publishing and one foot in the video games business. And I actually had quite a long desk in those days. And I used to shuffle myself backwards and forwards along this desk, either music publishing or video games. And obviously, the original video game company that I ran in Europe was called Activision. And it was what I call Activision One. So it was a real boom and bust business. But I just thought, this is a real challenge for me. I'm going to give it a go. And it grew and grew and grew tremendously fast.
So what's that? And at that time, was that when video games, how long had video games been a thing? So, where were we in what sort of year was this?
The only games prior to the Atari 2600 were the sort of really the early Pong games that you found in pubs and clubs that you just had on a tabletop. That was really the start of it. And this really was the beginning or the birth of the video game business as I think we know it now.
So have you got any good stories about that time? I mean, it sounds a bit Wild West, like this brand new thing emerging, and it all sounds a bit crazy, and, nobody knows if it's going to work or not. What was that like? Have you got any good stories?
Well, I think the best thing I can say is that I got all these samples over, and I thought, well, I still know quite a lot of the buyers from the large entertainment retailers. I'll go and see them and see what they think, and are they going to order any? And most of them showed me the door fairly rapidly. And there was one guy for W.H. Smith's who said, you know what, I'm going to try some of these and see what happens. And that really was the big breakthrough that we had to get it into W.H. Smith, which at the time was a huge high street retailer. And I think from that, all the others realized that they made a mistake. And I think I was kind of invited back in to talk to people. But the problem with Activision One, as I called it, was that we spent more money than we earned, particularly in America.
Right.
And it eventually went into what was called Chapter 11.
Mm. Yeah, because Activision, as it happens, Activision was a customer of the tech department back in the mid-noughties. So we used to do a lot of work with them. And at one point, when you signed up your registration card in the box, when you bought a game, it would be sent to a PO box in Sheffield, and we would enter that data into a spreadsheet. Yeah. I only remembered that this morning, actually. I know when I was swatting up on your CV, but yeah. So we kind of got there in the noughties. So Activision One, it was this, which is now, I believe, isn't it, the biggest games publisher in the world?
I think Electronic Arts may disagree with that, but it's certainly one of the biggest in the world. Sure.
So what, after you were working with Activision, you helped the Americans move over to Europe. What happened then?
Well, I think that basically Activision One went bust, and I found myself without a job. Right. Which was, one of those moments of like, oh my God, should I have stayed in music publishing? But I was approached by a couple of other people who obviously had spotted me, and off I went again and built up another company. And as I say, I guess the thing I enjoy more than anything is help build companies. And when they get to a certain size or become too corporate, then I kind of I find it a bit dull because I'm not a very good corporate animal.
So how would you describe yourself?
Well, interestingly, I think I call myself an entrepreneur. And this morning I thought, I'm going to look it up, what the Oxford English Dictionary says. And it says, one who takes on enterprises with a chance of profit or loss. And I think that's what I do.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So what was your next move in games?
Well, I went to a company called Melbourne House, which was owned by a couple who were based in Australia, and again, built up the business for them. And the only thing is we had a couple of absolutely runaway hits. And I guess my favorite story in those days was keeping up with orders. And one day I'm sitting in my office and the phone goes, and this voice says, "This is John Menzies here." And I went, "Oh, right, okay. Don't tell me you've run out of this product." Yes. I said, "Well, who am I talking to?" And he said, "I'm John Menzies." I said, "Is this important to you?" And he said, "Why do you think I'm ringing you?" And it was the son of the founder of the store.
Really?
Yeah. So it's interesting how I think the video games business did creep up on a lot of people. They didn't realize how big it was even then.
And so what's the size of the games industry now?
Well, if you believe all the statistics, which I think are probably true, is that if you roll the music and film industry together, it's still smaller than the computer games business.
Really?
And I think, again, statistically, outside of the city, it's also the biggest contributor to GDP in this country.
Wow. And you were there at the start. So you've literally been there at the birth of this entertainment behemoth, this kind of massive kind of entity. And so what were the other kind of defining moments for you as an entrepreneur looking to make profit or loss? Where made profit for you during that time? What were the things that really kind of were the kind of real touch points through that period as the industry was growing and as you were growing with it?
Yeah, I think I had most fun, I think, in the earlier days building up Mindscape, which would merge with the Software Toolworks in America. And we were building up quite a good business. And along came Pearson, which is this very large media company who were determined to get into the games industry. And cut a long story short, they paid us far, far too much money. And we just said, okay, well, if you want it that badly, you can have it. My American colleagues immediately retired and headed for the hills. And I kept going with Pearson because I thought they were nice people. until I realised that they had really made an awful mistake. And the bulk of the guys who unfortunately made all the decisions in those days got fired. And I thought, hang on, I think this is time for me to go.
Mm.
And that's when I tried my first go at retiring.
Right.
And all the things that I was going to do, I couldn't remember any of them then. And ended up, I think after a couple of months, starting to look around to see what else I could do. So I've actually retired twice, but that was the time when I really thought I'd made enough money I could retire and not do anything else.
And what year was that?
It was about 20 odd years ago now.
Mm. It's interesting. You've got this point in your life where you've been in the music industry at the top of your game. You've been at the video games industry, which goes on to sort of be this enormous beast. And you've been sort of at the forefront of that. You've made a few quid off of Pearson, and you sat there kind of twiddling your thumbs 2 months in, and you failed. You failed at retiring.
That's it.
So why did you go back into entrepreneurship then?
I think mainly because I started to take a few phone calls and decided who I'd like to work with next. And it took a while to get to it, but the phone call that I did get was from a good business friend of mine that we've worked together in the past. And we set up NCSoft Europe, which was part of the Korean huge games, online games business in the early days of online games, and set about building up the European operation. And I was then getting on a bit in terms of the games industry, but I still felt, well, I'll give it 6 months and then I'll walk away from it. And like all these things, it grew and grew and grew. And the only thing that happened was that, if you can imagine, you get up in the morning, the Koreans are already on the phone because they're ahead of you. And just towards the end of your working day, all the guys from Texas are on the phone. So I was working some crazy hours, and I thought, hang on a minute, this is not good. I need to stop doing this before it kills me. So I went to the big chief in Korea, who's an amazing guy, and said, look, I gotta stop doing this, because I said I'd do it for 6 months. I've now done it for 6 years. So I need to leave. And he said, well, have we upset you? And I said, no. And he said, is there something you've done that I need to know about? And I said, no, I just need to retire. So he said, well, then sadly, you should retire. And it's at that point that I started to look around, because, again, I couldn't retire. It was driving me nuts. That I would start helping early stage companies, which leads me on to finding you guys.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because we've worked now together for 5 or 6 years, and it's been a really, again, I was reflecting on our relationship before we had this conversation. And what struck me actually was part of the rationale, or the reason I had for setting up this podcast, was coming out of the experiences that I've had and I guess we've had in the last 3 or 4 years. And I would say that the last 3 or 4 years have been a bit of a defining moment for me in terms of my growth and experience as an entrepreneur. And actually, I'd like to take the opportunity just to thank you, because you've been a massive help in terms of, I guess, some of the things you were saying earlier, like putting an arm around my shoulder occasionally and giving me a kick up the arse occasionally, and through a time that was very challenging. So, thank you for that, because that's been really helpful. But I kind of think it's like a defining moment for me this last few years. And I'm just curious to see, well, what's been your perspective, having gone through your career, and then you started working with us 5 or 6 years ago, and then the last 3 years we've had a series of challenges. So what do you see as the defining moments in there that you have observed in what we've been doing, and what else have you learned over your career that you would also think that sort of echoed in that time?
Well, if I go back to the decision to get involved with you guys, and as I say, 2 of the 3 criteria was you failed, but the third one was could I get on with these people? And that's where you excelled. And I think that for the first couple of years, if I'm perfectly honest, I didn't understand what you did. And I found it was a bit like a man with a lot of waistcoats who could say, well, if you don't want a website, we'll fix this. And if you don't want that, we'll fix that. And then I think along came your vision, which was the boot camp. And I thought, now I understand what these people can do.
Right.
I think from that was a defining moment, that from then I could see how the boot camp leads to everything else within the company. And it's absolutely, the industry has caught up with us. We haven't had to catch up with the industry. And I think the whole industry now has this necessity to go through various degrees of the boot camp. And I think that is so important. The good businesses are growing faster than ever, and they're the ones that can come undone.
Well, I think it's this principle of continuous improvement, or trying to do things better every day. And I think that's the thing that I really sort of learn, I guess, for myself personally, but also for the business. And just going back a step, actually, just I'm curious to ask you, because I've never actually asked you this. So on a number of the sort of your kind of checklist of reasons to work with companies, we so 2 out of 3 we failed, but you felt you could get on with us. And I'm just curious, genuinely, why did you think you could get on with us? What did you see in Rick and I that you felt was worth getting involved with?
Well, I think that the thing that I like is that the two of you have got very complementary skills. And I think that is very, very important. And I think the other thing is that even though I didn't understand what you did for the first couple of years, I did express an opinion every now and again, and you took it on board. So I thought, well, that's all right. That's good. And as you know, I've got a couple of mantras, one of which is don't get distracted. And I think, again, in the earlier days, there were distractions all over the place, which together we've slowly but surely ironed out. And now we've got a very focused business. And I just think that it's that which is now going to be very exciting.
It's very true about the distractions. I think that's something that Rick and I, well, definitely I suffer from, is attraction to shiny things. And one of the things I've learned is not to chase every shiny thing, just, some, and only the ones that are really, worth chasing.
Yeah.
But what would you say? I mean, so you've been part of this defining moment or series of defining moments I've been gone through. What would you, looking back at your career, both in music and in games, what were the defining moments for you?
Well, I think that obviously the defining moment for me originally was finally jumping out of music into video games, which was a bit scary. And as I say, looked like I'd made a dreadful mistake, but it wasn't, because I think it was just the right thing to do. And I guess the other defining moment was saying to myself, you've actually got to stop running companies before it kills you. And therefore, that, I think, was probably a defining moment. So whatever I do now, I do it because I really enjoy it and I want to see some success in what I'm involved with.
So you said it was the right thing to do. But how did you know that at the time?
I think it's just one of those things which is very difficult to define, apart from the fact that you just know and you believe it's the right thing to do. And on that basis, you just keep doing it and getting it there.
So this is very much an intuition or intuitive feeling.
Yes, that's right. And the other thing is just this certain, mantras of mine, one of which is don't look for any distractions or don't get into any distractions. And the other classic one is, and I saw it on a man's desk many years ago, was cash flow kills. And I thought, wait a minute, what does he mean by that? And he said to me, leant across the desk, and he said, that means negative as well as positive. And I said, gotcha.
Right. So on that subject, are there any particular pieces of advice that you've been given over the years that have really stuck with you, apart from cash flow kills?
I think one of the greatest lines that was told to me years ago was, don't chase empty wagons. Even however attractive the wagon looks, if it's going down a hill, you'll never catch it. Which sounds very bland, but is actually in business very true. There comes a point when you go, wait a minute, stop chasing it.
And what do you mean by an empty wagon?
Well, because it's got nothing in it, but you don't know it at the time. And it's going down the railway track and you think it looks lovely and it's probably full of gold, but it isn't.
Okay, so you're chasing mirages, chasing things that aren't really real.
Correct. Which is back to distractions.
Yeah, well, yeah, quite. It's the shiny thing again, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, so I've had a series of, I guess, cock-ups in the last few years, or like 3 years ago, really. And I've learned a lot from that. Are there any particular cock-ups or failures or things that have gone wrong in your career that, looking back, you go, actually, that set me up for later success?
One of the things I would say is kind of really relevant to what I do is to believe that what you're doing makes sense. And I know it sounds silly, but a lot of people kid themselves that what they're doing does make sense. And they just chase it and chase it. And you shouldn't do that. So I don't think I've got any defining moments, but certainly I do think if you believe in something, go for it. But again, if the wagon starts running away from you, don't chase it anymore.
And I'm just curious to see your perspective on how would you judge that? How does somebody judge that? Have you got any kind of stories that would illustrate that point?
Well, I guess more recently, as far as our dealings together are concerned, are that if you think something is not looking too good, then do something about it and don't try and nurse it back to life. You shouldn't go there. In business, if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen.
So it's funny. There's a guy called Ray Dalio, who I think we've spoken about before, that he runs the world's most successful hedge fund. And he wrote a book called Principles. And his number one life principle is to embrace reality and deal with it. And it's something that's really stuck with me, because I think that's what you're saying is, if it's not working, embrace that reality and do something about it.
Yep. I've read the book twice now, thanks to you, Dan.
Really?
And second time, it's even better than the first time. And you're right. You have to just look at it and say, this is not working. And rather than kind of think, how do I make it better? Then you just sometimes have to take hard decisions and change things.
Yeah. So looking back again, and you've got this amazing experience from all these different sectors and working as an entrepreneur with early stage businesses of a variety of types. And I know you're involved in a VR initiative at the moment, you're an incredible company, as well as working with us. But if someone's listening to this who's yet to set up a company and yet to set up a business, what would you say to them? What advice would you give?
I think if you believe in something, first of all, realize what you're getting into financially, because you may not earn any money for a couple of years, and you've got to make sure that you've either got a nice environment where someone's going to look after you while you do that. And just if you believe in something, just get on with it and do it. And the only thing I would say to that, again, is if you feel what you're doing isn't working, then stop doing it. But if it is working and it's going to take you a while to get there, then you've got to look around and see if there are people around you that can help you. And in this day and age, there's an awful lot of people with an awful lot of experience that you can turn to.
And how would they do that, do you think? Where do you start looking?
Ask. You never know where it can be your next door neighbor, or it could be somebody you work with, or on occasional times when I've done it in the past, in the earlier days, you take a deep breath and try and get hold of somebody pretty well known in the business world. And surprisingly, I've found is that the head of a large corporation is actually sometimes more accessible than a lot of people under them.
Really?
Yeah.
And have you got any stories about people you found that in that way?
Not off the top of my head, no. But
Fair
I
enough.
think I did try it a couple of times, and it does work.
And so you've got some great advice. What advice should they ignore?
If anyone says they can promise you the world and it's too good to be true, it is.
Right.
It's as simple as that. And certainly in the early days, I think you have to say, I've just got to do this myself.
Or just literally muck in, get your hands dirty, get it done.
I mean, certainly in the earlier days, I can think of 2 or 3 companies that we started on the literally on the dining room table. And it's only when my wife has said, will you get out of here because you're driving me mad, that we've actually ended up with an office. Or in the case of one company, 110,000 square feet of space, which we need.
Well, you can fit a lot of dining room tables in that amount of space.
A lot.
Well, it's been really great chatting to you, Geoff, and we're just coming up to our time. Is there anywhere, if people wanted to learn more about what you're up to, where do you want to point them nowadays? Any particular websites or anywhere that they could learn more about you?
I spent most of my business life up until about 10 years ago being all over the place and being in the whatever the industry press was at the time. And for the last 10 years, I've done everything I can to not be available and not be around. And so I don't think I can help them in that respect, apart from you can probably find me if you want to.
Excellent. So you're incognito, off-grid, living in a secret location in the UK, and we won't divulge its location to anybody. We'll keep you secretly squirreled away.
I don't think anyone can hide these days.
Well, put your dark glasses on, you'll be all right. Well, that's a really fantastic chat, Geoff. Thank you so much for your time. It's really great to see you. And I think I personally have learned a lot in that. And I think there's a load of great stuff there for our listeners. So I'll see you at the next board meeting. And
yeah, absolutely.
And have a great afternoon.
Okay, it's been a pleasure.
Take care, Geoff. See you soon. If you want to receive the top 5 tidbits, the nuggets, the insights from each episode in your inbox every week, head up to honeyblueupthebusiness.com. Yes, the snappily titled honeyblueupthebusiness.com, and enter your email address. And we're going to get the best bits. We're going to collate them together and we're going to send them to you. So you don't have to write them down when listening to the podcast. Yes, nice and easy. So get up there, enter your email address, get the tips, all good. And I've got to say before I go that this podcast is generously supported by my company, The Tech Department. Thank you, guys. They are indulging me as I'm pursuing this little creative project. If you want to find a company that helps make your technology better, so that gets your business better as well, head up to thetechdept.com. So on behalf of everybody here, thanks for listening. See you next time.